you here today. And I'm excited to learn more about poetry with you. And we can start with introductions. So I guess we can popcorn it. Actually, how about I start with an introduction and then I'll say the next name, and whoever ends with the introduction the next time can choose the other person to introduce. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, great. So, hi, I'm Becky, your rabbinic intern and faithful servant, and happy to be here. And the genesis of this class was really a personal love of mine for poetry, and a chance to get to explore that with you. So Gail.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Gail, and I also enjoy poetry, and I enjoy Becky. So to me, it was a double header, and I look forward to the next few minutes together, and just enjoying another Zoom activity from the temple. Okay, how about Aileen? Hi, dear. How are you?
I'm good, Gail. How are you?
Good, good.
So I'm Elaine Morgenthal, and I wanted to do this because I also love poetry, and just wanted to hear biblical poetry and see what it's all about. So I was anxious to join. Marlene, how about you?
Okay, I'm Marlene, and I also enjoy poetry, and I enjoy Becky. So put the two together, and I thought it would be a fun thing to do. Phyllis.
I'm Phyllis, and yes, it's something I know so little about, biblical poetry. I figured it's got to be interesting, and I love to be with as many people as I can these days, and it's good to see everybody, and I'm bound to learn something today. Let's see, I think Ethan.
I'm Ethan, and I don't, poetry is not my choice of reading usually, but I did take a poetry class, a couple poetry classes when I was studying to be a rabbi, and enjoyed those classes as well, but it's not something I gravitate to usually. I'm more of a narrative, find more meaning in narrative, but excited to learn with you as well. Owen?
Hi, I like to read and write, and I'm interested in this topic. I'd like to learn more about the poetry in the Bible.
Amazing. Marion, you want to wrap it up for us with your introduction? Hello? Oh, Marion,
you're on.
Don't hear it.
Yeah, there you go.
Marion, I think we can hear you now if you want to talk.
Oh, okay. Well, it sounded wonderful. I've always loved poetry. And I really don't know very much about biblical poetry, and I'd love to learn about it. And it just sounded like a wonderful adventure.
This is so exciting. Okay, great. So I'm gonna actually start with a screen share with you to just talk about biblical poetry and how it might just be different from the more contemporary poetry that we may be used to when we think of poetry. But to get us started, I just wanted to, and everyone can unmute themselves if they want, or keep yourselves on mute, but we can, like, what comes to mind? What are the words that come about when you think of just the word poetry, or when you think of poet? They could be names of famous poets. They could be lines from poems. If you're like Rabbi Prosnit, maybe it's just like run away from poetry or that old class or but any just like what comes up for you when you just think of poetry? Yeah.
Well, not just any poetry, but because it was biblical poetry that this was about, the first thing that came to mind was the Psalms. And I don't know if that's what you were going to be focusing on or not. But I know that in terms of the Psalms, I'm always hearing how they're comforting, and this is a time that we could all use some comfort. So I just figured maybe it would help me understand them more.
Awesome. You mean the Psalms, like why they bring comfort to people?
Yeah. And now I may be way off base. That might not be, what you're doing at all.
Well, it is, you're not off base, but that's not what I'm doing. Not today, at least. But
well, you are.
But they are, I mean, the Psalms are beautiful, and we can actually devote part of our class talking about them today, because they exist in our liturgy. We say them during the most important times of our Jewish year, mostly for Hallel, when we're doing something extra in the liturgical cycle. And there's a reason why specifically we have those Psalms. And so that was right on point. I could tell your daughter is a real guy. So anything else, like, does anything else come to mind when you think of poetry, or does anybody have a favorite poet?
Rhyming comes to mind.
Yeah.
Rhyming.
And flowing thoughts.
Rhythm.
Colorful expression of words.
Colorful.
A lot of metaphor.
Flow, metaphor.
Saying the most with the fewest words.
Musical.
And I love the poet Langston Hughes.
Yes.
Langston Hughes. Owen, I heard you say musical.
Mhm.
And rhythm.
Rhythm.
Yeah.
I think that it helps you remember things. Form is actually an aid to memory.
I'm just writing down all these incredible.
Appreciation can give you a new appreciation for nature or whatever the topic is.
Amazing. Thank you. That in itself, I feel like is so rich. I just wrote down like everything you said. So now I'm going to ask you, when you think, Marlene, you were getting there, you kind of like jumped the gun a little. So when you think of biblical poetry, what comes to mind? And it could simply be like Psalms, or it could be, I actually don't know, that's why I'm in this class. But do you think of any parsha? Do you think of a song that comes to mind?
Not a particular one, just Psalms in general.
And from what you know of the Psalms,
not much.
well, actually, does anybody else have any, does anything else come to mind for people when they think of biblical poetry in the Bible? Like, it could also be like, I don't know where it is.
Yeah.
Right.
I think of David and his lute and his harp, his lute.
Right.
Yeah, ancient prophets and maybe scholars.
Yeah, the prophets with their poetry, right? That's there's a lot of emotion that comes out in the prophetic works. Usually a mix of deep love and appreciation for God, and also like deep, deep frustration with the people who they're prophesying to. That is definitely a part of our biblical poetry. Now I'm going to screen share with you just something. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So actually, I can't see. I have to, oh, this is great, Zoom. Okay. So Phyllis, can you actually read that quote by C.S. Lewis for us?
This is the most remarkable of the powers of poetic language to convey to us the quality of experiences.
So C.S. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Perfect. I said.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, your answers all mirrored what C.S. Lewis thought poetry was when he wrote about poetry. But C.S. Lewis, he wrote a lot about the way that his poetic language influenced his religious beliefs. And although he was Christian, the idea that religion and poetry could ever be bifurcated or separated for C.S. Lewis was almost inconceivable. And so when I read this quote, I read it actually first, I think a few years ago, with a professor of poetry and Bible, and then again last night when I was just looking around. And it struck me as so interesting that for him, religion and the biblical words, even if they were like in narrative form in prose, that for him, all of the Bible was poetry. And for us, that might actually be a little different. And for you, it might be different. For, like right now, I'm finding poetry in the writings of James Baldwin, even though most of it is prose. It just feels like honey to me, and like that's what poetry is, in my opinion. And so I just wanted to frame that in a way to give you agency when you read Torah and when you read our Hebrew Bible, to look at the passages that, they might not be poetry to some, but they could strike you as poetry. And that's the power of what our religious writings do. And I think that's why, obviously, I love reading Torah. There'd be a big problem if I didn't, I think. But that I think is something that I would just like to empower you to do, if you choose to come to the next class, or just whenever you read Tanakh, to see what strikes you as poetry and to take ownership of that, because that can live with you and give you source of strength, like the Psalms, wherever you are, and in whatever path you are in your Jewish journey. Just a small little history lesson. Oh, I don't want to show you the colors yet. Okay, so poetry in the Hebrew Bible is displayed in different ways. So we had some of our prophets, just speaking only in lines of poetry, if that makes sense, like Isaiah. And when you see the words of Isaiah, they're actually, if you see what's on the sheet before you, they're framed as they are here, almost all of his writings. We don't get that singular prose. We have couplets, or we have actually whole verses that are segregated by couplet form. And that's due to the way that Hebrew and ancient Hebrew derived from Ugaritic as a language that they started scribing in. So the book of Psalms, we have a lot of the wisdom books, Song of Songs, Lamentations, prophetic texts, and then there are poems within the Torah that we have. Actually, so like according to what we conceive as poetry today, that is about 1/3 of the entire Tanakh. And there are different reasons behind this. Someone, I think, Owen, I think you said that it helps you, the form of poetry helps you remember. So we know also that we have two traditions. We have a written tradition and an oral tradition of passing down these stories. And the poetry and the cantillation marks as well, that go alongside with our Torah, helped people remember what these stories were, because they are in a form. And when we chant them, they kind of sound like songs also. And that's the power of chanting, that it helps us remember in the rhythm of what we're reading. Now I'm going to, I hope you could see this. Change screen for you to a picture of a Torah scroll. Okay, great. So this is not a prophetic writing. This is Miriam's song at the sea. But what I just want to focus on the structure of what you see here in this moment. So what can you see, and how is it different from the two sides that encapsulate it?
Well, definitely looks like it's set up differently. It almost looks like, if you can imagine the Red Sea parting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not continuous.
It's not
The sentences.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Seems like a lot of space.
space, yeah.
Right, and that image of the parting of the Red Sea, in the symmetry too of that column, it's weirdly symmetrical as well, on both sides. Anything else that strikes you as just different, or maybe you see a similarity?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well.
So the reason why we're looking at this too is to show not only that the imagery of the metaphors that are encapsulated in these poems is important, but also that as they evolved in the scribal recording of them, they also became really powerful images within themselves. Like when you open the Torah scroll at this part, you know that this is the song because you see that sea parting. And the metaphor is doubled because it's not just in the Song of the Sea and the words we have here, but it's actually in the physical representation of the words and how they were chosen by the scribes to present for people to read them. I'm a romantic when it comes to Torah, so I just think that this is like so beautiful. I can't get over how I think, in how genius that decision is, and how it was intentional to kind of emphasize the value of what this is as a tradition. Like reading backwards in this tradition, we are automatically given a sign that this part is very different because it just simply looks different and jumps out of our scroll in a way that other portions don't do. And so, it's also really nice if you're opening the Torah and you need to find your place for that portion that week. It's a very nice convenience, I will say, but it really does convey to us a message that our ancestors were trying to give to us during that time. This is important. Read this, and the fact that artistically in its physical manifestation on this page, it was able to emulate the metaphors of that song. And also, like, the symmetry is quite poignant here, not because it emulates the splitting of the sea, but simply because it's beautiful. So we don't see this actually occurring in, for instance, like the book of Isaiah. Isaiah will just be written in couplet form, if that makes sense. When you open your Tanakh, it looks like a poem, but Isaiah just doesn't look like that. Whereas when the Torah, I mean, like Isaiah isn't in the Torah, but the Torah in its manifestation of the Song of the Sea is simply also just pleasant to look at. And so we're given a sign that this is a good thing, that this is a joyous event. And so any thoughts or responses, reactions?
This is an ignorant question, but
No?
has the Torah, this looks like the creativity of a particular scribe. Has the Torah been changed or altered over millennia by different scribes, kind of doing different things, arranging the words or any of that kind of stuff?
That's not an ignorant question, because, and I can only partially answer it. Maybe Rabbi Prosnick can also jump in. I know that each scribe is always different, and part of the frustration of reading closely when reading biblical text is trying to reconcile the differences that we find in scribal errors of the text. And so I actually don't know when this came about as a particular tradition or culture to write the Torah scroll in this way. And most of what I learned about this actually came from my professor, like my notes about how the physical manifestation of this kind of shows us that it's poetry. But as I can't speak to as far like the date to which that transformation or like the time period that might have changed. Rabbi Prosnett?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when the scribal art of the Torah was codified, but every single Torah, while the penmanship might look differently, the layout is the same. And so this is on every single, so it would be interesting to find out when the scroll was specifically became this minhag and this custom of it looking like this for the Song of the Sea. But every single Torah would exactly have this breakdown, that while the letters might look a little different, we would see this in every single Torah portion.
Does that answer some of your question, Owen?
I guess so. I mean, if this form is replicated in the oldest Torah that we can look at right now, right?
Yeah. I also, you're giving me, I have to submit a thesis proposal in a few weeks. So you're giving me some really good ideas. But yeah, that is an interesting question about, the ways in which Torah scrolls have evolved in their printing, especially because they're so unique in that they're written by individuals. And so that is something that I can do some research in.
So you're saying, and Rabbi Prosnick's saying, that no matter what Torah we open, whether in our synagogue or a synagogue in Prague, okay, if we turn to this parsha, this is what it will look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in itself is beautiful. I told you I'm a romantic, but you can go anywhere in the world where there's a Torah scroll and you will find this.
So if you happen to come upon one that's different, that would be pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I think I would retire before I actually entered the rabbinate. That would be amazing. So I'm going to actually switch back now to our text study. Now that we have like a little history before us. And I thought, now I know, I thought going into Psalms might be like a little too, I want to surprise you. So we're actually going to do Deuteronomy 32, 1 through 2, which is Ha'azinu. a poetry that we know fairly well. You know, we listen to it every year. And does anybody want to read the Hebrew? Okay, would anybody be down to read the English?
I'll read it.
Great.
Okay. Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words I utter. May my discourse come down as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass.
Okay, so reading this in English, thank you so much, Gail. Let's just like point out some similes, metaphors. What do you, what's your visceral reaction? Do you think it's beautiful? Do you think it's painful? What emotions do you feel?
When reading it, may I?
Yeah.
Well, first when I read it, the words that popped out initially were, "Oh heavens," and then the rain coming down and the grass. And the vision that I got was the heavens, our beloved souls who are no longer with us, are praying down to us, bringing the rain to produce the grass, which is new growth or new birth.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's I guess all of those pieces just caught me.
That's very powerful imagery. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
Well,
I
Yeah, Phyllis, and then Mary.
well, I think what I get out of it is words are very powerful. Just like rain nurtures the grass, words nurture ideas and feelings. So words here come across as being very important.
They are. I think someone had said that in the beginning of when we were reacting just to the word poetry, someone had said like it is the expression of something in the fewest number of words. And I think that this is a beautiful example of that. The imagery is so powerful, and we have maybe, I don't know, eight words per line at most here. So that very much comes through. And yes, well, I have a surprise. Okay. Marion?
Yeah, I love the line, my speech distill as the dew.
What does that make you, what does that bring up for you?
Well, just how beautiful and maybe soothing one's speech can be. The right words, the beautiful words.
So,
it's funny, of the whole thing, that line was the most difficult for me, Marion. So I actually need help with that line.
all right, let's go into it. This line, my speech distill as the dew. Is that the line, Marlene?
Yes.
So just gonna highlight it because colors are, why not? So I'm gonna read this again, and let's does anybody mind if we just like look at that one line? Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words I utter. May my discourse come down as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass. So what comes up for you, Marlene, when you read my speech distill as the dew?
I find it confusing.
I
the word distill, that throws me.
Okay, so what is distill?
Well, distillation, I guess, is bringing something down to certain of its parts.
Right.
Marion, did you want to say something?
Well, I think to me, that has a very hopeful expression. Because it's in the morning when the dew is spread over everything,
Mm-hmm.
there's that new potential and possibility.
Yeah, I think so. I think this also, what's interesting about this line is, like, when I think of dew, I think of grass, just like dew droplets on grass. And that's very much just influenced by my childhood of being near grass when I wake up early in the morning. And so for me, what comes up emotionally is like peace and quiet, because I would say past 6:30, that's when all that peace and quiet goes out the window. It's for me so like impacted by my personal understanding and connection with that time. Like I connect dew with morning, and I connect that type of or that time in the morning with peacefulness. And so that's how I read that. It kind of like snowballs into that kind of imagery for me. Elaine, I see you reading. I feel like a thought is brewing, and I'm looking at you brewing the thought, and I really want to know what's going on. Do you have any, like, does anything surface for you?
Oops. As I read it, I guess I just find so much peacefulness in the passage that the words, like, hear my words, let them come down as rain, my speech as dew, showers of youth, young growth, and droplets on the grass, that it just brings in so much peace and easiness of the morning, the day, like anything you can think of, like it's at ease.
I wonder if you said that in like around Westfield, the weather's been a little misty lately or overcast.
Yes.
I wonder if, so to give context, which I actually should have given you before, apologies there. Does anybody know who's saying this and why they're saying it?
It just seems like a prayer. I don't know who said it, but it's a plea for the prayer to be heard and to nourish and to find favor.
That is true. Yeah, it's definitely a petition. Rabbi Prosnet.
Yeah, so we're also looking at a translation of the Hebrew text.
Mhm.
So, right, so it's the biblical aspect of it, but we're in Deuteronomy, and this is Moses talking to the Israelite people, his final words basically to them before he dies. So it's his final words. And so actually, I think it's interesting. Ya'arof kama atar liki tizal katal imarti. So the word for distill is tizal, which I think it's not a word that we read in the Hebrew Bible often. The only other places I would say with the same roots are actually when Moses kind of hits. If we remember back, Moses gets the Israelites are complaining, and so maybe there's some foreshadowing here. The Israelites are complaining that they're so thirsty, they're so hungry. God says, speak to the rock and water will flow. But he doesn't speak to the rock. Instead, he hits the rock and water flows. And that's the reason why he can't go into the promised land. We see that root of Tizal there, here as well. So I think the biblical writers are playing a really nice trick here, that the word Tizal, if we were biblical scholars, we remember that goes back to when water was flowing and Moses couldn't get into the land. And this is his final words. And the reason he's giving these final words, because he can't go into the promised land, is because of this water as well. So I think sometimes the translation is strong, and I think this still is a strong translation for this word. But because we are not all Hebrew native speakers, we might lose some of that foreshadowing and some of the thoughts there as well.
Rabbi, what would you have an idea of another synonym in English that you think might be better? I just, that might.
Yeah. So my speech settles as the dew, perhaps could be another one. That could. I don't know if that's because there's a sense of this, it's an active verb. There's something flowing, right? We know that water flows from the rock, distills as dew, but maybe that's a little bit of settles as the dew might be a little better.
So like some of the commentaries like Rashi, thanks Rabbi Prosnit, some of the commentaries like Rashi point to this word, and they say that when you say just still as the dew, it's a moment of making concrete those words. The idea that, and this is actually in the Woman's Torah commentary, but the idea that the discourse comes down in the rain, and what is produced is also a mist. But a mist is like fog, right? We can't really see through it. It's an in-between liminal type of presence of those words, and distilling those words coming down as the dew makes them concrete for the people to hear.
Oh, the essence, maybe the essence.
Yeah, that's actually a great, that's a far better synonym. Yes. How are we feeling here? It's been 40 minutes and we've only gone through 2 lines. So, any questions, any comments? Marlene, did that clarify anything for you, or just?
Yeah, it actually did. But at the same time, now that I have the context that Rabbi Prosnit gave, I don't know. It's for it to be Moses's final words. I think it's a little weird.
Why do you think that?
Sorry, but this is just a section of his final words. This is much longer. So I think
okay.
It's a longer poem in that sense. So these are not his final words, but but this Torah portion is all his poetic words to the Israelites. So it's part of it.
Okay, and maybe I don't know if I'm right about this, but maybe also he's continually talking about words, and he was the one who had difficulty with words. Mm-hmm. So maybe in the end he wants to say, hear me as if I am speaking clearly, because it's difficult for me to do so.
Could be. I mean, yeah, we have to keep in mind that like he really is not going into that promised land, but is his whole, I mean, almost his whole life. You could characterize his life as someone who is deeply devoted to getting the Israelites to the promised land.
Yeah, maybe he wants to make sure he's understood.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, I mean, do the Israelites and Moses always agree?
No.
Sometimes like they're not, there's a lot of growing pains in their journey.
Right.
And so when we have like this Hazinu, like give ear Hashemayim, this plea is actually reflected in a part of the Hebrew that it's hard to explain because we actually don't really, in English and in like the Latin-based languages, poetry is not written in this way. So anytime that there are pieces of alliteration or rhythmic cadence in Hebrew poetry, it's not that those are rare times. That's actually just not what the focus of Hebrew poetry has done, like biblical poetry has been. Most of what biblical poetry focuses on is parallelism, which is why we have, I mean, I just love colors, but also this was a really good way to show some of the parallelism in the metaphors that is usually the emphasis of biblical poetry based on the way that Hebrew evolved as a language. In Latin-based languages, alliteration and like the cadence that Elaine, you had spoken about, like of Langston Hughes, for instance. He has wonderful cadence and rhythm inspired by jazz and the 20s of what poetry was during that time. That's very unique to Latin and Germanic based poetry. Linguistically, that is just a feature of how these two sources or cores of languages kind of evolved. And so that's not to say that alliteration and rhythmic cadence do not exist in the Hebrew. They exist everywhere like that, but more what we see more frequently is the parallelism in the words and the lines that build off of each other. So for instance, if we were just to go to Deuteronomy 32, 1-2, give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words that I utter. So if we were to compare these two lines for a second, what can you tell me about the first and second line of this couplet? Do they mirror each other? Do they intensify each other? Are they contradictory?
I think it emphasizes, the second line emphasizes the first line. It is parallel.
And if we were to go to the Hebrew, let's do this. Hazinu. So Hazinu, I'm just going to bold for convenience right now. Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words I utter. The tishma, so, but it's, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Now, so ha'azinu, give ear, vitishma, let the earth hear. The thing is, when we say give ear, O heavens, and then let the earth hear the words I utter, so what is contradictory there? Who's doing the listening? Who's commanded to listen in the first line?
God.
Right? Hashemayim, the heavens. What about the second line?
Well, that's on the earth, so I guess it's people.
Yeah.
So who is Moses speaking to?
Everyone.
He's speaking to everyone, right? He's not just saying, let the earth hear the words that I utter, like everybody hear the words that I utter, but he's also making this petition to God. I mean, actually people, I don't know, it's good that Rabbi Prosnit doesn't have video, because this is not a stance that many people and scholars would disagree with me here. But I'm gonna push forward. And so so how does that change the way that you're understanding this poem? Does it change the way that you understand what Moses is saying? Does it change the emotion that you think he's feeling?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Phyllis.
I think it's very strong. It's a command. It's very, he's going to say something very important.
It is. I'm just charging my computer. Don't want to lose you.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I think in the first line, since he's talking to God, and the second line, well, he's still talking to God, but he's asking God to have people hear what I say. So he's asking God to have an effect on what the people understand from him. And maybe it's as a result of his not, of his differences with the people over time.
Mm-hmm.
Or he just feels he hasn't been successful completely in making the message to the people.
Yeah, I mean, we also mentioned that Moses, with the emphasis on words here, it might be a little ironic because Moses had problems, right? Like he had a stutter. So he might also be saying in this one couplet, "Give ear, O heavens, let me speak." Like, God, grant me the ability to speak to my people. Let the earth hear the words that I utter. This might actually be a petition only to God, asking, like, these are my final days. I need your help to utter these words. Okay, now let's move on. Are there any questions or comments? Owen, anything that comes up for you?
No, I don't,
Okay. So the second line, may the discourse come down as the rain and my speech distill as the dew. So I'm going to try something. I really don't know if it's going to work. Okay. Maybe it just won't. If I were to put these two lines next to each other, oh, that kind of worked. Did it? Nope. Okay. Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. So I'm just going to say, so this is the second line. May my discourse come down as the rain, right? And then we have my speech distill as the dew. For a moment, so this is actually the first line over here of the second couplet. This is the second line of the second couplet. Now I want us to compare the first lines of the first and second couplets with the second lines of the two. And I ask, like, what comes up for you here? Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Then what if we were to continue with, may my discourse come down as the rain?
It would come forth easily, and I think.
Right.
Like the rain, and then the spread is the dew.
Well, like, also we think during this time we're in the desert. When we ask for rain, what are we? I mean, it's not, I'm upset because it's been raining here. That is definitely not the biblical view of the power of rain during this time, right? So when we're asking for rain, the ask is also like inherently a different ask, right? We're asking for a miracle. The like our Avinu Malkeinu prayer originated as a prayer for rain. And it evolved to become part of our high holiday liturgy so that we could petition to God in such a strong way. But when we're asking for rain, when you see a petition for rain in the Bible, we're really asking for something big here. And in the context of what historically happened during those times, there, in the history, the historicity of these stories, a lot of the times we focus on, for instance, like the flood narrative, which we read of this week. Did it actually happen? And when we think of these floods, I will never forget the way this professor explained this to me once. Like, they were real scary floods. I think that she has like maybe 9 PhDs, and that's how she described these floods. But she, like, these floods were true deluges, and they were all encompassing. And they were important, not because they happened very frequently, but because they happened infrequently, and there is an approach to understanding them as something that is still divine, even though they actually did kind of really encompass the land and ruin things with it. They were still rain. They came about because of this miracle of rain. What about the second line? Let the earth hear the words I utter, my speech distill as the dew.
I think he wants his words to cover the whole earth, to cover the whole area.
So now I'm going to ask you a different question. What if this poem was written instead like this, in the way that we've created it here by changing the verses? Or it was written as we see it here? What do you think is more powerful?
The first way.
The first way? Why is that, Marlene?
I think it's prettier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
Line reinforces the previous line. It emphasizes it.
Yeah.
Illuminates it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is true. So there's an intensification there. Robert Alter, who wrote The Art of Biblical Poetry, talks about the intensification as almost what we would kind of interpret in modern English poetry or Latin-based poetry as a compensation for the power of alliteration in the rhythm that we hear. So that parallelism with metaphor, that intensification of image is, he says, I mean, who's going to argue with Robert Alter, is actually can sometimes work as a form of alliteration to intensify the very visceral feelings that we get from this poem. I'm going to stop here for questions or comments. Anything you disagree with? Disagreements are great.
Mm-hmm.
But Becky, that's one of the beauties of poetry. There are personal explanations and those of the poet themselves. Whoops, sorry. And when I read it, this is a very somber time for me. Thinking of, I want to explain why I said what I did. Sadly, today I have double yahrzeit, so I'm thinking of those up in heaven, and then the new birth. And that's, when I read it, that's exactly what came to my mind.
Yeah.
And that's how I interpreted this poem. Perhaps tomorrow, on a different day and a different, the way I feel, it could have a very different explanation. But that's why poetry has always intrigued me. There's really no right or wrong answers. There's just so much feeling in every poem.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It does. I mean, we're never reading the words of a poem in the same way as the same person in any given moment. And so, and in the same way that that occurs in our liturgy, and the way that we read prayers, like so many of our prayers were actually taken from poems in the Bible.
Mhm.
Um,
I first thought that this poem was about he wanted to get his message to be
Oh, wow.
Nurturing or nourishing. But now that you said that Moses had difficulty speaking,
mhm.
seems like he's really praying for eloquence.
Mm,
He wants to reach everyone with these words. He's asking for the help to make sure his words are essential, nourishing, all that kind of thing.
yeah. I mean, it changes the way that we like sympathize and empathize with the speaker as well. Yeah, it's I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for Moses. It is, he definitely has a very difficult time being that mediator between God and the people. And in the way that songs and poetry are able to express that emotion, I think it's very befitting that his life, as we read about it, ends in Deuteronomy in the form of a poem. Especially as someone who had difficulty speaking, this choice to end in a poem that is so selective and intentional with words seems like the biblical writers were really just incredibly in tune with every layer of metaphor they could ascribe to the end of his life. I'm actually in the chat. I've shared this Google document with you, which has what we went over today. This is not homework, but if you want to do it, I would go over it with you. But it's just there's another passage from Haazinu where we learn about Moses, another piece of his poetry that emulates what we spoke about in terms of parallelism and metaphor. And we also have commentary from the Netziv, who is this very famous 19th century rabbi who speaks specifically about this poem and what it does for him and his community. And then for next time, I think we'll try and do this, but I'm open to any suggestions. So if you do want to learn something for the next poetry class, like please let me know and we'll incorporate it, or at least try very hard to. We wanted to bring this into a contemporary lens. So the last page is a poem, The Wild Iris. You might know it from Louise Gluck. You know, her poetry actually reflects, whether intentionally or not, a lot of the different tools that we saw in the biblical poetry that we studied today. In this poem in particular, she speaks of her experience being pursued by the forces of anti-Semitism in her native land. And it's understanding this in a contemporary lens and where we find the Judaism in our poetry today may also be helpful for us to create our own liturgy that gives us hope and just comforts us during hard times. So I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to putting my email in the chat. Email me if you have any questions or suggestions. This, thank you. That's all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
This was
Thank you,
great.
Becky.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. It was wonderful.
Yes,
Until
Thank
next
you
time.
all.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Thank
Very insightful. Thank you.
thank
Well, I learned more from you for sure. So I'm excited to type these notes up, and also please also feel free to just be in touch if you want to talk. I really miss Temple Emanu-El a lot and seeing everybody in person, but I'm always here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So,
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Good to be together.
Right.